You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
I'm going to set up today's conversation with a newspaper headline that I just saw this morning. Retailers to receive one-time payment of $6 billion from the Visa Mastercard settlement, and the deadline has been extended. That's the headline. We're going to dive into all the details in what it means to you in this week's episode. And joining us today is Doug Kantor, probably the most knowledgeable person in our space looking at the credit card industry, both for NACS as NACS General Counsel and also within the Merchants Payments Coalition, which represents all retailers in this broader issue of credit cards and debit cards and payment cards. So thanks for joining us once again, Doug. And let's just start out. We've talked a lot about swipe fees. We talked a lot about credit card fees and debit card fees. There's different things going on. So can you first give us the lay of the land? What is this settlement that we're talking about, and where does it fit in with things that are not settlements?
Well, first, thanks for having me on the podcast, Jeff. I always enjoy it. The question and the headline are really interesting here because NACS, as well as class actions of everybody who takes a credit or debit card, have been pursuing litigation for just about 20 years now. And this settlement is a settlement of those antitrust class action cases in federal court in New York. It's about $5.5 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, except when you compare it to how much money the credit card companies have taken from retailers over those 20 or so years. But it is still a big deal, and it's important that people make sure and do what they need to do to participate in it.
And this is a done deal. So if you have taken credit cards over there's a certain period of time, you are eligible as part of this class action. And as I said, it is a done deal. So this is different than the other things where we talked about. And I guess before we get into more details on this done deal and what you can do, there's a bad deal the last time we talked that you said was a bad deal related to a settlement that was closer to $30 billion. And right after we talked to you, a federal judge agreed, and that has been thrown out. So that is different. Can you kind of walk through what is the difference between this one that is a done deal? You should, if you're interested in looking at your share, get involved, and the other one, which was a bad deal, and that is not happening.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because this is incredibly confusing because it's all part of one legal case and it's all different pieces of it are happening at the same time. So here's the best way I can explain it. In suing Visa, Mastercard, and the big credit card banks for antitrust violations, there's sort of two basic things that retailers around the country asked for. Number one is they said, hey, these guys are doing bad stuff and breaking the antitrust laws. We need them to stop doing that. And so there's a whole question of, well, how do Visa and MasterCard's actions and rules need to change so that they stop doing the bad thing? That's one. The second is, okay, they've been doing bad things to us. How much money do they owe us to make up for all the bad things they did? Those are the two different pieces, and it's really important to keep them separate or it gets incredibly confusing. So the bad settlement you noted that the judge threw out was the, how do we change the things that they're doing in Visa and MasterCard's rules so they don't continue to break the law? And that settlement was incredibly inadequate. The $30 billion number you threw out there was a complete mirage and was going to be overtaken by other fees that they could still raise. There were all kinds of problems, and we can get into that. But that's one piece of it. That other piece, though, of, well, how much money do they have to pay to make up for all the bad things they've done? That settlement actually was approved. I'll go through. There was one appeal, and the reason for that appeal is really relevant to our convenience store members right now. But the bucket of money is approved, and it's going to be given out. But really important to note, it's only given out to people who ask for some of it. So that's the key, I think, for today. We can talk about both pieces, but the time-sensitive piece is, if you don't ask, you get nothing. And so we can get into that.
Okay, so let's get into that. And another way to maybe look at how you described, there's still a huge need to address swipe fees. And so another way, I guess, at looking at this is the $5.6 billion settlement is a speeding ticket, and they're still speeding. So they're still speeding. That's another issue. We will address that. Not in the podcast, but there's plenty to do on swipe fees and changing that system so speeding no longer happens. It's not a perfect example, but we do have a fine, and that fine, speeding ticket, if you will, you can get your share. Now, originally there was a deadline. If you accepted Visa or MasterCard between a certain period of time, the deadline was in May, and that has been extended till the end of August. And here we are at the beginning of August. So time is a-ticking. Can you talk about what are the criteria for retailers to know whether or not they are eligible for part of this settlement?
Absolutely. So first, yes, the deadline is now August 30th. And the number one criteria, to be clear, is you have to submit a claim and say, please give me money to get money. If you don't submit a claim, here's one thing I can tell you with certainty. If you don't submit a claim, you will get $0 out of this settlement. So everybody should be aware of that. As to whether you can get money even if you do submit a claim, here's the thing. If you took Visa or MasterCard credit cards between January 2004 and 2019, you're eligible unless you're eligible unless you opted out of the settlement they reached for money in 2019. So that means really in 2020, did you file an opt-out? Or you settled your claim already individually through the litigation process or what have you. Those are the only two reasons why you wouldn't be eligible if you were taking cards during that time. And so submit the claim, and the worst thing is they can tell you no, but those are the reasons why you might not be in there. Now, there is a complicating factor for people in our industry. And here's the strange place we find ourselves in. Many folks in our industry operate what we all typically refer to as branded outlets. Might be Exxon, BP, Chevron, what have you. But the business owner is not Exxon, BP, or Chevron. There's a local business owner. They just have a deal with those oil companies. Some of those oil companies, the brands, settled their claims already with Visa and MasterCard. What is not clear is what that means for the retailers who operated under those brands. This was the source of the appeal I referenced earlier, where a bunch of folks in our industry went to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and said, hey, what about me? I didn't settle my claims, but I was part of that brand. So what happens? The what happens, we don't actually know the answer to. Some of those brands have claimed they did settle on behalf of the retailers that operated using their brands. Some of them have said, oh, we gave you some benefit of those settlement dollars. Mm-hmm. Some of them have said, well, actually, you can't hear what they've said because it sounds like maybe they're keeping the money, and you don't say that very loudly when you do that. And some of them said, oh, of course, we're going to share that money. But here's the problem. The courts have not decided this issue. So in order to find out whether as a branded retailer you get money, you have to submit a claim. But then more problems come in.
And you may or may not be part of the eventual settlement. So we talk about you need to submit a claim. Let's say first off, who in the business should be filing this claim? Is there a certain level of, should it be the person that files the taxes? Should it be, how does this work? And then where do you go to file the claim? And I have more questions, but I'll start with those two.
All right, let's start with those. So the first is anyone in the company can file the claim. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter what level. There is some fact gathering that it helps to get whatever information that you can get about the fees that you paid over that 2004 to 2019 time period. So maybe that means it's the accounting folks or somebody like that.
Somebody with access to tax records and all that other fun stuff.
Yes, but look, lots of our members don't have those records or don't have good records, especially going back that far. The best thing I can tell you on this is do the best you can. Whatever you do have, submit it. If you don't have stuff, just say so. Hey, we don't have it, but here's what we can tell you. Or you can submit it and say, hey, we just don't have these records. And there will be a process whereby they go to Visa and Mastercard and try to reconstruct things as best they can. But whatever you can submit, the more information, the better. That's great. The second is you'd asked where do they file it? And so there's a couple of possibilities. Number one is retailers should have received a piece of paper in the mail that was a claim form. And so if you've got the claim form, you can just fill it out and mail it in. The second is there's a website, paymentcardsettlement.com. If you want, you can put in the 3 W's before that, www.paymentcardsettlement.com.
And HTTP.
Exactly. It dates Jeff and I as being very old that we even
exactly. That information superhighway is going to be amazing.
But paymentcardsettlement, all one word, .com. I don't know what happens if you throw in the spaces, but don't. It's all one word, paymentcardsettlement.com. If you go there, you can submit your claim online. Here's the annoying exception, is everyone can submit their claim online unless you're one of these branded retailers and your brand already settled, because then the online system is going to block you and say, hey, we think you already settled. If that happens, don't be deterred. Remember, if you don't send in a claim form, you get $0 guaranteed. That's not the outcome you want. Submit it in paper. Submit it to the address on the website, send in the information you have, get it to them any way that you can, just submit it, because even though the website is blocking you and says, hey, you're not eligible, the website can be wrong. This question has not been determined by the claims administrator yet.
And another question, I told you I have lots of questions. If you're not sure somebody already filed on your behalf, whether mailed in something or went to the website, there's no penalty in doing it twice with good, if it's with good intentions, of course. And is there something in the system that would guide you and say, hey, somebody already got this?
Yeah, that's not great. I would certainly try to avoid having the company file more than one. It should, if you do the online system and it tells you that, I would ask other folks in your company a lot of questions and see if you can track that down. Yes, if you file a second one inadvertently, that'll get sorted out. It's not that big a deal, but I would try to submit only one from a company.
Okay, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of retailers out there in the country. $6 billion is a lot of money. But as you said, if you do nothing, it's like, I think we try to tell our kids, the answer is always no unless you ask. And you will get zero unless you file, and then you may get something. And it's not going to be pennies, but there's no way to determine how much it will be until the deadline has passed. They've reconciled everything, and they say, this is the number of people who filed, and this is the relief that each one should get. So a lot to be sorted out here. Is there any time frame that anybody's suggested where this all happens and a check or something like that will arrive in the mail?
So there's no precise time frame for these things. I would say, look, these do take a while. And I think especially on this one, as you pointed out, there's a lot of retailers. I think early on in the case, I heard that they sent out something on the magnitude of 11 million of these notices and claim forms. So that's a lot of folks to potentially return claims and for the claims administrator to make sense of it all, right? Somebody's got to go through all of that and figure out, oh, does this business get money and how much compared to the whole pot of money? And were they part of some other, group and what do they do if they're a branded outlet, et cetera? So this is going to take a while. I expect that sometime next year, we'll get a lot more clarity around that. But there's no telling exactly when that will or will not be. Federal courts work at their own pace. And, the rest of us just do what we can from there.
So wrapping up on this, the deadline is August 30th. It has been extended. Paymentcardsettlement.com.
Paymentcardsettlement.com. That's right.
Do that by August 30th. If you don't submit, you won't get anything. If you do submit, story to be told down the road. So let's just spend a couple minutes. That is just part of the broader credit card issue. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time about that now, but we still have a swipe fees issue, and NACS is still aggressively looking for remediation to that to add competition with the Credit Card Competition Act. Can you give listeners any guidance for what they can do to move this bigger thing through that goes in addition to this small $6 billion settlement?
Absolutely. And this is why you're such a good podcast host, because you knew I would go away very sad if you didn't ask me about the Credit Card Competition Act. So here's what's going on there. We've had a lot of good political movement in favor of the Credit Card Competition Act and getting broader reform, as you put it, stopping Visa and MasterCard from speeding while they're still speeding and causing us harm. The biggest development really is that one of the senators who is a co-sponsor of the Credit Card Competition Act, J.D. Vance of Ohio, is now the Republican nominee for vice president. And that certainly helps us with our level of support among Republican members of Congress and the sense that politics is moving in our direction. And on both sides of the aisle, I think there is a strong move toward favoring Main Street over Wall Street, and that's exactly what Credit Card Competition Act does. Just to give folks a sense of the magnitude, because you were talking about the size of that $5.5 billion settlement, the conservative estimate is that the Credit Card Competition Act would save a total of $16 billion per year on an ongoing basis, year after year. if it were to become law, our estimate is that that's over $10,000 per store per year in the convenience store industry. So it's real money. And we are very hopeful that we can continue to push and can get Congress to take a vote and pass it.
And as technology becomes a bigger part of our life and electronic payments becomes a bigger part of our life, this problem will just get worse.
That's exactly right.
Take our opportunity here and address this system that is just built wrong.
That's right. And what's interesting is we can look at it now with the technology we have today, and it's incredibly apparent how wrongly, in your words, the system was built, because all of us today can take these little cell phones out of our pockets and send one another money. And it's cheap and fast and reliable. There's not a need for unwieldy big payment networks, Visa, Mastercard, to be in between and to exact a huge toll on that. But when businesses take that money, then suddenly there are huge costs involved, and that should change.
So wrapping up, we just talked about technology a couple minutes ago or a couple seconds ago. And one of the lines I really liked hearing at the NACS Day of the Industry Summit about technology is it comes at you slow and then it comes at you fast. And using that analogy to what we're seeing with the swipe fee fight, it has been a long slog. And let's think of that as, we could use the word slow, but it has been a long slog because we're fighting somebody that kind of has money because that's their jobs. But it's possible that we could enter that phase where it moves fast. And when it does, look for those alerts from NACS, look for those calls to action, because there may be opportunities. We don't know when, but we need to be ready for that. And we need to make our voices heard, because this settlement now that we talked about for the bulk of this equates to about 4 months of what ultimately is achievable with an equitable competitive system in place. And that's the goal of the Credit Card Competition Act.
I think that is very well said. We will need everybody's help if we're going to get this done, because the banks have all the money here. So we need the people and the sweat equity to compete with that.
So 2 things, just focus on that for anybody listening. Number 1, deadline August 30th, paymentcardsettlement.com. Make sure you're part of that class. If not, you won't see any of that money. Secondly, pay attention to what's going on with swipe fees. There may be an ask coming down the road, and we need your voice. So again, thanks for joining us, Doug. I look forward to talking to you when things are moving very fast, and we do need those voices. So look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.